Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Biosecurity Studies at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. On the behalf of the principal, Professor Clive Landis, the advisory committee, the director of the center, Dr. Kurt Douglas, and the entire team here at the center, I wish to extend a warm welcome to you today. Special welcome to our four presenters who will share a wealth of knowledge surrounding the topic climate change and sustainable development. To our stakeholders, the press, and those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Whether you're from Barbados, the region, or you're joining us internationally, we welcome you to the Center for Biosecurity Part 4 webinar in the series Climate Change and Sustainable Development. We are delighted to have you join us today. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Kurt Douglas. I am the director for the Center for Biosecurity Studies here at the University of the West Indies at the beautiful Cave Hill campus in Barbados. We do have a few housekeeping notes. One, we will have open the Q&A section. If you scroll on down to the bottom, you will see the Q&A section there. You can place any questions that you have for the presenters there rather than in the chat so that we can have a visibility of it and therefore be able to field the questions to the relevant panelists. Second of all, we also have some polls that we will run. These polls are important for us as we continue to plan our webinar series so that we can deliver more engaged content for you, content that you love, that you enjoy, that you find useful and impactful. So there'll be two polls. The first poll will just be taking demographic information regarding your age, which country you're from, and maybe what's your occupation, and which organization you represent. The second one will be more webinar specific in terms of the content that is being shared. So we will do that at a later time in the webinar. But we have an action-packed lineup for you, and I'll allow Mrs. Griffith to do the first introduction of our very first panelists. Over to you, Sanchi.
Our first speaker is Ms. Heather Pinnock, Managing Director of Lucia Caribbean in Jamaica. Ms. Pinnock is a Jamaican placemaker and champion of sustainable tropical living. She has formal training in architecture, urban design, and project management, and over 25 years of experience in construction and real estate. Her work across the region includes master planning, energy efficient and net zero buildings, sustainable housing, and public spaces. In 2021, she concluded a successful stint leading one of the government of Jamaica's largest real estate development and management agencies, the Urban Development Corporation, where she actively raised the national standard for making development happen sustainably. Heather is a licensed real estate sales agent and has served as a planning advisor to UN Women Caribbean and co-chair of Commonwealth Women in Planning Network. She leads her own boutique development company, Lucia Caribbean, which offers advisory services with a focus on sustainable development, climate resilience, and conscious living for tropical regions. Heather will present the topic, Climate and Sustainable Real Estate Planning. Welcome, Heather.
Hello, good afternoon. It is my absolute pleasure to be here. I am happy to be here to talk about my favorite subject in the world, which is climate change and sustainable development. So if you just give me a second to get my presentation up and running, and I'll be ready to go. So yes, my name is Heather Pinnock, and I'm from Lucy Caribbean. and I'm here to talk to you about climate change and sustainable development. So let's get right into it. Okay, so let's take a today check. So as of February 2025, climate change and sustainable development are not only topics for this webinar, but are very current and important topics. In fact, just what's that, 7 days ago, on the 19th of February, the Secretary General of the UN was in Barbados at the opening ceremony of the Heads of Government of CARICOM session. And he spoke about three key things that are affecting the Caribbean and the three key things that we must unite around as a Caribbean region to move us forward. And two of the three things were climate action and sustainable development. And I put his quote here because I think it's an important way to start any conversation about climate change and sustainable development in the Caribbean. And he says the Caribbean is the exquisite beauty of the Caribbean is framed all over the world, but there is trouble in paradise. And that is true. The trouble is not unsurmountable, and there's a lot of work that's being done and being done by my colleagues in this session and being done by our governments across the region. But it's important that we all become aware of it. And I am going to use his closing line actually now to launch my conversation, where he says, a unified Caribbean is an unstoppable force. I urge you to keep using that power to push the world to deliver on its promise. And so that's why I'm pleased to be with you today from Jamaica, another part of the Caribbean, because together I feel very strongly and I'm very glad to be included in these activities that are happening across the Caribbean, because I feel very strongly that indeed, that together we can really make a difference. So let's talk about those two things, climate action and sustainable development, from my point of view in urban planning and real estate development. So what is sustainable development? This quote is actually from all the way back in 1987, and I've been using it for so long that I now know people who are younger than this quote, but it's still a good quote, so I'm still using it. In the Brundtland Report, which is one of the early global considerations about what do we do today to look at the future, one of the result of that session on our common future, the Brundtland Report, puts out a statement, this statement, which we have been using now for touching up on 30 years, but it is still good. And it says, what is sustainable development? Sustainable development is development which meets the needs of the present, so that is not denying the present of what we need, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And what this is almost like a golden rule, just don't take more than you need. We're not saying starve, but don't take more than you need. So that is what, the very essence of sustainable development is, meeting your needs today, but not compromising the ability of the future to meet their needs. All right, so this is going to take me to a simple balance. So I use this simple Venn diagram to help people really bring sustainable development clearly into their minds. What is sustainable development? At its essence, it's a balance. And it's a balance of the three P's: people, planet, and profit. So people is our society, our culture, our heritage. In this case, when we're dealing with this particular topic, our health, so the health of our people as well, how we balance that with our environment, with the earth and all our natural resources, and how we balance that again with profit. That is our economies and the financial viability and competitiveness of our economies, of our businesses, of the things that we do. So in a quick way to analyze anything to determine if it's sustainable is to consider how does it affect people, planet, and profit. The three P's are what help us to always very easily do a quick assessment of something. And if it's hurting any one of the three, then we're not in a good balance, okay? Let's continue. I'm going to just briefly go over this. So the United Nations, on behalf of all the countries in the world that it represents, established back in 2015 the global goals for sustainable development. And the aim is that these goals will be achieved by the year 2030. So they did a schedule for 15 years. We're now in 2025. So there are only 5 years left for us to achieve these goals. And there are 17 goals. You can get into them in a lot more detail, but these are kind of our global standard for how we want to achieve sustainable development. And if we look at this global standard, then we want to give some thought to what is the relevance of the things we're talking about today, which is real estate development, the built environment, architecture, or spaces that we occupy. What is their relevance to the sustainable development goals? And the thing is, in my work in real estate is cross-sectional. Land construction, real estate, it touches almost every other industry, and therefore it has the power to be an important driver for achieving these sustainable development goals. All right, next slide, please. So let me go into some specific things around the SDGs and real estate industry. So things like land use planning, land use patterns, urban design, urban town planning in general, urban and rural planning and design, or construction practices and materials are major determinants of greenhouse gases emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions are what drive climate change. And so the things we do in real estate are a big contributor to that. Construction, the actual creation of buildings, and the way that we put the buildings together and the way we take them apart at the end of their life, how we manage their waste throughout their operation and at the end of their life, can deeply affect environment and communities. And there are things we must think about. The practices around planning, development, design, real estate construction can have important and far-reaching impacts on the society, and they can be key parts of political decisions, and they are key drivers of our economies. The availability of housing. Housing is the biggest element in real estate development. Housing and where we live, housing is a basic need. It's shelter, one of our basic needs. And the availability of housing is a major quality of life determinant. The entire industry around the construction, the development, the building, the management, the trading of housing is really the baseline of the real estate sector. And it is a very key part of our quality of life determinant. And also, construction and real estate development foster economic growth in general and provide us with significant and far-reaching employment opportunities. Can I get the next slide, please? So let's get some figures up here. How does real estate development and the development of the spaces that we live in or built environment, how do they affect climate change? So let's talk about property and global emissions. 40% of global emissions come from buildings in the real estate sector. That is significant. You will find that when we are talking about global emissions and climate change, we talk a lot about things like agriculture, about the burning of fossil fuels. We talk a lot about transportation. Somehow the building sector is not often one of the mentioned ones, but I have to mention it because 40% is a significant amount. And 40% of our global emissions come from the spaces in which we live, work, and play. The spaces that we spend most of our days, they generate about 40% of global emissions. Of that 40%, 70% of that 40% is related to building operations. So that is how we heat and cool in the Caribbean. We don't really heat buildings, but we certainly spend quite a penny and burn quite a bit of energy cooling buildings, and also how we do mechanical activities. That's everything from elevators to gates to anything that requires power to operate. Other 30% of the emissions from our construction sector are generated in terms of the materials used. So the actual creation of the materials, the creation of cement, of concrete, and the activities, the movement of things like steel across the world, those kinds of things also have a significant impact on our global emissions. All right, next slide. So let's bring that home to the Caribbean now. Here in the Caribbean, we have a situation where 70% of the people in the Caribbean region live at or near sea level and in coastal settlements. That's a significant amount of us. That means that there's a significant amount of us at risk for things like coastal erosion, for storm surge in the case of a storm or hurricane event. So quite a bit of our life happens near the coast. This picture that I've included is actually the North Coast Highway in Jamaica. And you can see everything to the right of that highway, which is to the north of the highway, is quite significant and all at or near sea level. You see large housing estates. There are some big hotels. There's another big hotel being built. There are shopping centers. There's quite a bit of investment in Jamaica and in all our Caribbean countries. We have significant investments in our coastal areas that are at additional risk because of climate change. Think of all our ports, our airports, our seaports, and even our hotel investments. A lot of those things are happening in coastal regions, and therefore that is major real estate investments that are close to high risk areas. And then 50% of our years in the Caribbean, 50% from June 1st to November 30th, 6 months of the year, which is 50% of the year, which is half of our lives, are spent under the clearly defined and recognized threat of tropical storms and hurricanes. So every year we have that Atlantic hurricane season. It goes on for 6 months, and it's a period in which we are aware that there is a significant possibility of there being a tropical storm or a hurricane. This figure, I think, is a little outdated. I expect it to be more soon. But 10% of our Caribbean economies, were at a value of about $22 billion, could be lost to climate events by the year 2050. So I think that is actually getting a little worse because we think about how, as countries, how do we ever invest in things like schools and infrastructure and stuff if every year your economy is set back by a weather event that causes you to redirect funds? It makes it very difficult for our Caribbean economies to thrive. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch very quickly on the impact of climate change. So climate change has a widespread impact on the Caribbean. We just spoke about some of the things: rising sea levels, stronger storms, more frequent and more intense droughts. We have heat stress. We have a coastal erosion, sea level rise. A number of those things happen. And these things threaten our environment, our economy, and our health, which, if you go back to what I said about what's sustainable development, is people, planet, and profit. So if we consider the environment would be the planet, economy would be profit, and health would be the health of our people. So climate change is directly threatening the possibility of sustainable development in our region. All right, next slide. I want to go back. This is actually just a throwback, but I think it's an important thing to remember. In 2015, when the Conference of the Parties met and we finally came to a global agreement around climate commitments towards net zero emissions, towards trying to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees below pre-industrial levels, the Caribbean was an important champion at that event. 2015 was a year that I felt very proud to be Caribbean. We were there participating, and we had this slogan, 1.5 to stay alive, because beyond that, we may be deeply affected. This image here is by Chris Gladding, who is an artist out of St. Lucia. And it's beautiful, but also haunting, because that's where we may be if we don't achieve some of the global climate targets. Sadly, since 2015, which is 10 years ago, we really have not achieved those global targets that we intended to. Then the commitment and the excitement then has certainly worn off. But as recently as 2022, we have moved away from simply saying we're going to limit to also looking at things around loss and damage. Loss and damage is acknowledging that the Caribbean region produces less than 1% of global carbon emissions, but suffers the brunt of the effects of climate change. And therefore, so we need to move from just petitioning you to do better to talking about money now. What kind of money can be invested in the Caribbean to help us with our adaptation, with making changes to respond to climate change? There are places where, indeed in Kingston, it's been identified that our climate is no longer changing, but has changed. So we have had climate departure. We have moved beyond changing to change, because at that point now, we can't keep asking, please try to keep it down. Instead, what we're trying to do is find ways to adapt and thrive nonetheless. Next slide. And I want to touch on, because of the nature of this webinar in particular, some of the climate-driven health risks. So first, we have things like physical injury and death, and that's from an actual storm event or any of the events. This photo is a photo of a wildfire that happened very close to my house. It gets dry, it gets windy. We now have serious wildfires as well. In the case of storms, we can have the malnutrition with the loss of crops, with just the loss of livelihood, so loss of funds to be able to continue to eat at a certain level. In Jamaica, we've only just started eating bananas again. Hurricane Beryl having taken all our bananas last July. We've only just started to get bananas again. Then we have things like air pollution. We are familiar with the ongoing Sahara dust that comes and goes, but then we have things like wildfires and other kinds of dust events. There are then waterborne diseases that come further to flooding, inland flooding or coastal flooding. Then we have vector-borne diseases, again, based on rising temperatures and other things that facilitate the growth of vectors of all sorts. That can be everything from mosquitoes to rats. Oh dear, I have air pollution twice. And then I want to highlight mental health, because one of the things that is indeed difficult that we don't acknowledge necessarily up front is how difficult it is to live even 6 months of a year with the knowledge that a hurricane could come, that a storm can come. It is a burden that we carry as Caribbean people that we don't necessarily talk about and think of ways to support people. And then the mental health trial of having survived an event and being very afraid for the next one. I think that is an area that we need to consider also. And of course, our vulnerable populations are at additional risk because they are already, we're not operating the same as everyone in society. So those who were already behind fall even further behind in the face of ongoing threats and ongoing events. Next slide, please. And so I just want to talk about some of the good, exciting things that are happening around climate smart real estate. We are seeing an increased prioritization of climate resilience and sustainable development in not only the design and the construction, but in the ongoing operations of our buildings. So we have a number of buildings that are LEED certified, and a couple of my colleagues are going to speak about other certifications. There was a time where we thought it wouldn't be possible, but now we do have a number of examples of LEED certified buildings in Cayman, in Jamaica, in Antigua, in Suriname, a number of places across the Caribbean. This picture here is of the Courtyard Marriott in Kingston, and it is a LEED certified building. It's Jamaica's first LEED certified building, but we're seeing more happening and more on the boards. In Jamaica, we also had a net zero energy building up at the University Mona campus, which I'm proud to have been a part of. So we're showing that it can be done. Of course, that's not only about design, it's about the ongoing operation of that building and seeing how that works. There is recently a certified net zero home in Antigua. And then in our tourism sector, which of course is a big, big part of our life and our economies in the Caribbean, we have new and improving sustainability standards, including things like EarthCheck. I'm an EarthCheck designer, and Green Globe Green Globe is another option. The World Bank, who works in most of the Caribbean countries, has also introduced their EDGE Building Excellence certification, which also looks at sustainability in buildings. And this means we're moving away from nice to have to instead being a requirement for funding. So as the World Bank and other financial institutions get more involved in this kind of standards, we're going to see that these standards are not just nice to have, not just things that crazy tree huggers want to do, but things that are seen as a core part of building, because we're recognizing what a strong impact building is having on climate change and on how building climate smart can make a big difference. And of course, it's also important to consider the full life cycle of our buildings, as I said, from the design, the concept, the construction, to when a building comes down. Next slide, please. And I like to end on this because sometimes I do long classes on all kinds of high-tech new things and standards and stuff. But I think it's very important that we also remember that we have a good and long history in the Caribbean of traditional sustainability and resilience. This little house is a house in rural Jamaica. The houses, there are chattel houses in Barbados that are a good example as well, that show you some of the important lessons that our ancestors had around a steep roof for wind resistance, putting on a veranda so you reduce the heat inside the building, using pretty fretwork that helps to filter the sunlight, using louvers that allows you to manage airflow, collecting rainwater, lifting the structure off the ground so you're away from vectors like mosquitoes and away from flooding, and having windows on multiple sides so you get cross ventilation. So all of these things we do want to look at the new, we do want to look at standards, but I also want you to remember that we come from a tradition of sustainability and resilience as well, and we should honor that also. And so in the end, I just want you to know that you do the best you can until you know better. And once we know better, we got to do better. And I'm here to help you to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heather, for a very exciting and informative presentation. Now we turn our attention. We have a very pleasant surprise for you. We have the Pro Vice Chancellor of UWI Global, Miss Sandria Maynard, and I'll just do a brief introduction and then she will give her remarks. Miss Sandria Maynard has been a qualified barrister at law since 1988 and has practiced both privately, this is domestic and internationally, and for the United Kingdom's Crown Prosecution Service. Her journey in working in academia began in 2012 as a senior lecturer and advanced to an associate professor in law. She's held senior leadership and management roles within UK universities across sectors of law, business, and the university group subsidiaries, both nationally and regionally, and manage multidisciplinary and multifunctional teams through globally disruptive changes such as Brexit and COVID-19. And as Pro Vice Chancellor for Global Affairs at the University of the West Indies, or the UWI, she leads the regional university's global engagement portfolio and coordinates all internationalization and strategic global initiatives across the UWI system. She's the president and CEO of the new International School for Developmental Justice, leveraging the high reputation of the regional university to build capacity and generate revenue as a core part of the university's financial future. Without further ado, PVC Sandria Maynard. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas, much appreciated. And I just wanted to say what a wonderful presentation just completed by Heather Pinnock, very engaging and brings us to a stark reality of what we're facing. So I just wanted to say a very warm welcome to all of our distinguished participants and persons joining us online. Now, I have the very distinct pleasure of bringing some remarks to you as part of the fourth in the series of the Center for Biosecurity Studies, who notably is the first entity in the Caribbean explicitly devoted to confronting multidimensional biosecurity issues. And a huge congratulations to the CBS on a very relevant and timely, and more importantly, informative series focusing on air pollution, healthy buildings, climate, and sustainable design. Now, the built environment, as we know and we have heard thus far, is a crucial part of how we live, how we work and play in the Caribbean. To address our evident vulnerabilities in this regard, critical attention must be paid to innovating our spaces to better suit the needs of our Caribbean societies. And we're looking at this in the face of climate change and prevailing economic challenges. We need to balance our natural resources to meet our present needs without compromising the needs of future generations. Now, our speakers today are all excellent examples of how, or give excellent examples of how sustainability should be encompassed into the essential areas of our life. And that will shape our future, particularly around the built environment, including areas such as design and influence on human health. Now, a lot of people look at this, and I always say this, forgive the English accent. I am Caribbean born, as I say that, from Nevis. And we have always here in the Caribbean, with our challenges with regards to access to resources, we've had to be a lot more sustainable than many of the other countries in the global north have had to be, certainly up to now. And we have been sustainable for decades now, learning to work with what we have, and certainly learning to function in our lives in that way. Now, the university has always been an advocate and a global leader in respect of sustainability. And just to share with you, we have just recently been appointed as the hub chair for climate action by the United Nations Academic Impact. And in my address to all of the hub chairs covering all of the Sustainable Development Goals, I noted, forgive me, that the university selection as a hub chair for SDG 13 further reinforces the global recognition of our work by our academic leads, who will join and continue their work as dedicated researchers to deepen global efforts to address climatic changes. Now, part of one of those actions that we have done is one of the first in the world to have a school dedicated entirely to the the Sustainable Development Goals. And that, as Dr. Kirk introduced, is the International School for Development Justice. But this isn't the first one we've done. There's a long line of initiatives that the UE has conducted over the years, and I'm pleased to share with you that part of those initiatives include us being active members of the Global University Consortium, for example, for SDG 13. We also chair the International University Consortium for SDG 13. We also recently became a member of the International University Climate Alliance and the Climate Finance Access Network. But some of the other key initiatives that have been happening on the ground, for example, we have initiatives carried out in our campuses. So, for example, we have the Rum and Sargassum project out of Cave Hill campus in Barbados. We have, as mentioned by Heather Pinnock earlier, we have our solar installations both at our St. Augustine's and Mona campuses. We've even introduced our electric vehicle charging points at St. Augustine's. And of course, collaborative research projects have been led by our faculty leads and our experts across all of the campuses in relation to the SDGs. We do continue our work because this is really important, mainly because we are feeling the effects of the behaviours of those in the global north. Since being here, I will say the flooding from when I was a child, the rains, the impact that it's having on our communities has increased significantly. And as part of that, it's important that we continue our advocacy. We ensure that we educate our communities when it comes to resilience. And that work has been carried out across many of our areas, such as our Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, the Centre for Oceanography and the Blue Economy, which is housed at our Antigua campus. But I also wanted to say that our governments also are engaging with the importance of this issue, and it can never be understated. So as an example, we signed at our SIDS conference last year that was held in Antigua, we signed an MOU with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis at that conference to really look at how we can build sustainability into their entire infrastructure. So we are again looking at how buildings, we're looking at all aspects and looking at how they can develop. So it is so important that we continue this work. So I would like to say that I'm looking forward to hearing many of the other presentations here today, and I hope that you take on board and get involved. There are many ways in which you can get involved with the activities that are conducted here at the university. And it's very, very important that we take this message back into our communities. And sometimes we forget, we discuss these excellent researches carried out. We speak about it in our environment, but it's really important to take this back into the community with mechanisms and suggestions about how our communities can, in an affordable manner, really work towards our sustainability goals. So I wish for you, and I wish to congratulate CBS again, and I certainly wish you an exciting and interactive discussion in your webinar today. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the presenters. Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas.
Thank you so much, PPC Maynard, for taking the time to share all the wonderful work that UWA as a whole has been doing, and also the governments across Barbados. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome. Now we will resume the order of presenters as we go forward. I wanted to just, before we do that, just signal that we do have a poll. I believe it should still be open at the moment, where you can complete that, and we will get to your questions and answers. Just a reminder in the Q&A section to place your questions there. For the presenters, we will have a session where we will address these questions and have the panelists either answer them live or answer them within the Q&A chat. And don't worry, we're recording this session as well, so this will be made available at a later date for those who are unable to join, or those who've joined us and want to go back through, because some of the information is really rich. We'll also do that. And there is a question regarding the previous sessions that we had, both parts 1, 2, and 3 of our climate change and sustainable development webinar series. We do have copies of them. I'll have to check to see if we do have them loaded on the internet, if we have them on YouTube, but feel free to reach out to us via email and we will guide you accordingly. So without any further delay, we have up next our next presenter. Over to you, Asantia.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Our next presenter is Mr. Ryan Clark. Mr. Clark is a lead accredited professional and the Director of Sustainability and Business Development at livelihoods in Energy Engineering in Israel. Ryan is a seasoned sustainability leader with over 20 years of experience in integrating cutting-edge environmental strategies into the built environment. With a strong background in energy engineering, green building certification, and HVAC optimization, Ryan has led projects that significantly reduce carbon emissions and enhance indoor air quality. His expertise extends to the impact of building materials on air quality and the monitoring technologies essential for ensuring healthy indoor environments. From lead and well-certified initiatives to pioneering decarbonization strategies in global markets, Ryan is committed to advancing cleaner, healthier spaces through innovation and collaboration. Ryan will present on the topic, Sustainable Building Designs. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Asantia. So I'll share my screen so we can get started. And let's see. Can you hear me well?
Yes, please.
Okay. 1 second. I think I'm missing something here. Here we go. Okay. So given the mandate from Kurt and having had that conversation, I thought the best way to follow up from Heather's presentation would be to introduce some of these concepts that we've been talking about leading well. And so we wanted to look at indoor air quality through these frameworks. Now, before we start, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. As Asantia said, I have a lot of experience in this field, and I've also had the opportunity to work in these cities globally. And while I'm a recovering architect who became a sustainability consultant, I also have worked with some reputable offices and had some very interesting clients. And I've also dabbled into technology, which Aksantia mentioned a little bit. Now, I wanted to break things up a little bit and start with this mythbuster because I find it like a something that happens all over the Caribbean when I run into people, not just the Caribbean, it's global. Everyone thinks that this device, which I think is pretty familiar, right? It's a split unit. Everybody thinks that this device is providing fresh air. Now, here's the thing. It does supply conditioned air, meaning it cools or heats the air, but it does not provide fresh air. And I think that's something that we should all keep in mind as we move through these presentations and just in general. I'm not sure what the level of technical knowledge of the audience is, but just want to break the ice with that. So, moving forward. Second. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about LEED, and we're going to talk about WELL. Now, these are two different frameworks for thinking about sustainability, each with its own pluses and minuses. But when you break it down, here's how you need to think about it. LEED is about buildings and people. WELL is about people. I'm going to dig into it a little bit more. But these are the two. If you remember nothing else, you should remember these two things. So let's take a look at LEED. So it's a green building rating system that's global. It's the most popular one worldwide. And it has thousands of projects under its belt. And as Heather said, in Jamaica, they just had their first, or maybe in the last few years, their first. I'm sure it won't be the last. Now, when you think about LEED, there's different levels of certification in it. And I think the one in Jamaica got LEED silver. So that means they got between 50 and 59 points. But these are the gradations of points that you need to get different levels of certification. I won't belabor this. Now, these are the holistic categories that LEED covers. And I'll tell you why it's considered holistic is that it's looking at first of all, it's called the integrative process, which is a way to design a building where all the project partners, meaning the consultants, including engineers, architects, civil engineers, etc., including project managers, clients, they all get together and engage in a deep discussion about the building itself, how it should perform, and the expectations. Then it looks at sustainability through the site. So how is the building connected to the site? How is it connected to the infrastructure, transportation, etc.? And I'll show you a little bit of what's being covered in each of these, but basically it covers water, indoor air quality, materials and resources, and energy, which is very important, and also innovation and design, which is it's like an open loop, all-encompassing way to look at it and reward innovation around any of these specific topics or something else that people see as being relevant. And this one is supposed to be around rewarding regional points. So, for example, in the Caribbean, water would be important and energy consumption would be important. And so they would reward any innovation, or they'll give you extra points just for meeting the requirements. And so this is the credit scorecard. Basically, this is how you figure out how you get awarded the points to get to the different levels of certification. And so, for example, in the location and transportation, this is what I meant when I said sustainable sites. So, or part of that. So, for example, it looks at density, how many buildings are around your building. Are you going to build out in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, somewhere? That means you have to bring all this infrastructure to service your project. Sustainable sites, like I said before, including rainwater management, open space, light pollution, etc. Water efficiency, energy efficiency. But the part that we want to cover today is going to be around the indoor environmental quality. I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper. So here's how they reward indoor air quality. And there are only a few elements of this that are important to us. And so I'm just going to point those out. So one is the minimum indoor air quality performance, and that's around meeting the standards for an international standard called ASHRAE, which is developed by engineers globally. And basically it tells you the minimum amount of fresh air that should be delivered to a space, a particular space that human beings are going to be occupying. Then we look at things like the environmental control of tobacco smoke, and that includes vapes. Then it looks at different strategies that you can use to enhance indoor air quality, including using low-emitting materials. And it even rewards you for dealing with the construction, during the construction phase of the project, making sure that the project doesn't pollute itself during the construction phase. What do I mean by that? I mean that, for example, when you're bringing in air conditioning ducts, this is ductwork, tin ducts that supply fresh air. These types of equipment should be covered or closed so that they don't absorb dust during the construction process. The other thing you would do during the construction process would be to isolate areas where you're going to do a lot of cutting, if you're cutting wood in particular. And so these are the types of things that it's going to reward. And so when we look at these strategies, I'm going to dig into them a little bit more. So the minimum indoor air quality performance is going to be based on compliance with this ASHRAE 62.1, actually. And again, that's the standard for ventilation, meaning the amount of fresh air that a particular type of space should be receiving. Again, the tobacco controls, there you have to make sure that the building does not allow for anyone smoking within 7.5 meters or 25 feet of any building openings, whether they be vertical or on the ground. And that's to prevent smoke from getting inside the building, because smoke is a big cause of not just allergies and other types of ailment, but it's a carcinogen, as we all know, and we just don't want it inside the building itself. And so enhanced indoor air quality strategies, one of the things that they recommend is increasing the amount of fresh air that's required in these spaces according to the ASHRAE standard. And another thing they also do is reward you for using air filtration systems on your air supply system. So when you think about the filters, you don't think about what I showed in the beginning, that split unit. That filter is not really going to be very useful, because that unit is just recirculating the air inside the space. So you're not getting fresh air anyway. What I'm talking about is larger commercial installations that have massive systems to bring fresh air inside the building. And the way that they do that is through an air handling unit on the roof, which is a machine that basically sucks air in from outside and sends it, after it conditions it, into the spaces. And so that machine uses a filter to remove pollutants from the air, whether they be, dust particles or what we call PM. They're really, really microscopic particles. And so MER 13 is a very strong and efficient filter for removing those types of pollutants. Now, in terms of low emitting materials, what we're talking about here is reducing the amount of VOCs in the building. And these come in a variety of packages, whether it be furniture, adhesives, sealants. I'll get into that a little bit later as well, but there are lots of ways to kind of design a building that's going to might look beautiful, but it might actually be polluting the people inside. And so these are all harmful toxins and pollutants that we want to keep outside the building in order to maintain the well-being of the occupants of the building. And as I said, during the construction phase of the project, you also want to make sure to protect all this equipment and even materials that might be absorbent. So you don't want your ceiling tiles or acoustic tiles or insulation to get wet, because then you start the premise for mold being developed because of that moisture. Now, as we step into well is like I said, basically a similar framework to LEED in terms of how they reward you. And it uses the same principle as LEED in terms of the number of points that you need to achieve in order to get to different levels of certification. And WELL's approach is quite different, and it's very much focused on the well-being of the occupants of the building. And so you can see it here that they've already broken it down into a much more sophisticated and, I would say, personal set of criteria around rewarding these types of behaviors. And so, for example, there's air, water, they even get into nourishment. So what kind of food do you offer in the building? And this is particularly for commercial offerings. So offices and hotels, any commercial enterprise, basically. They also look in light, because light has a major impact on human beings, and movement, getting you to move through the building, thermal comfort, sound. Again, there's going to be some overlap in these elements that are covered here with LEED, but WELL in particular covers a lot more. So again, things like nourishment, movement, mind, and community, these are not really touched on by LEED. And so there's an opportunity, even though they are very different, for some synergy between these two frameworks. So for example, WELL and LEED all address these issues, but in different places. So for example, in indoor air quality, in LEED, the same topics are being addressed in these 5 or 6 different sections of the WELL rating system. And we're going to get into a few, but not too deep, because I don't think we can, this is the platform for that kind of engagement. But the idea is to show you that there is some synergy there, and particularly around the air section of WELL and the indoor air quality section of LEED, there's a lot of synergy. And so let's dig into that a little bit. So now, when we think about these two addressing similar items, yeah, it's true. But LEED is addressing only 5, or incentivizing only 5 topics around indoor air quality, whereas WELL is addressing 14. And so I think you're going to see that WELL is a much more aggressive program for making sure that the well-beings of the people inside the building are really being addressed. And LEED, again, because it's also addressing elements of sustainability that deal with the built environment itself, I think is a little bit distracted. But they share a lot of DNA, and they also reward you if you are if you're pursuing certification for both of them. So this is digging into WELL a little bit, and this is a little detail into the air section of WELL. And you can see here that, I mean, everything here is addressing air quality, whereas LEED had like 4 or 5 credits, and this whole thing is strictly about it. But one of the things I wanted to talk about here is what's different in well that doesn't appear in LEED. And so one of the things is the kind of air quality monitoring and awareness. And what that addresses is not just designing the building and constructing it to be sensitive to producing a good air quality, but actually monitoring and paying attention to it throughout the life of the building. Then it looks at combustion minimization. So that talks about starting burning anything inside the building itself. And it wants to reduce the exposure of human beings to these things. And I think later on you'll begin to understand the real impact of this through some of the other participants, Chris and Grace. But I wanted to touch on that as well. And yes, microbial and mold control. Right? These are all specific to indoor air quality at a scale that we can all, we are all aware of, but in LEED, it's not specifically addressed. All the other things here, all the other features here are addressed in LEED one way or the other. But I just thought it would be good to point this out. So if I can boil it down for well, again, it's addressing some of the same air quality standard issues, addressing ventilation issues, filtration, and reduction of VOCs, but it's doing it in a much more stringent and aggressive way. And one of the differing factors for well that they reward is, again, like I said, the air quality monitoring and awareness. And this is done through air quality sensors that are usually placed on the walls of spaces that you want to monitor, pay attention to. And there are several solutions available. I think we'll probably have to do another webinar about getting into the details of this, because it's a really intense and deep dive if you really want to understand it. And so to boil it down, the shared incentives and motivations behind LEED and well can be boiled down to these four things, which are like ventilation, like providing you with enough fresh air or going above and beyond that, filtering the air to remove pollutants, etc. So dealing with removing any sort of opportunities to introduce pollutants into your space. Low emitting materials, so choosing and controlling for VOCs and other pollutants in your space, and controlling the construction process so that you manage the indoor air quality during construction so that you don't negatively impact the building during its occupancy and operation phase. And so I wanted to show a few examples of how these strategies can manifest themselves. And let's start with the ventilation systems, right? So optimizing for fresh air. So how that manifests itself is that the amount of fresh air coming into these spaces through these ducts, these grills that I highlighted, is going to be improved or increased or exceeded based on whatever the local code is or whatever the code is that the designers have been forced to comply with. Another way, now VOC reductions is a much more exciting set of strategies. So one thing you do is address furniture. So every piece of furniture that's made has a bunch of either the manufacturer, the raw materials of it, the way it's manufactured. For example, plastics, they produce volatile organic compounds, and over time, that new car smell, for example, it's not a good thing. It's a sign that you're actually being exposed to volatile organic compounds that can be carcinogenic. And so you want to be in a space where you don't have that new smell. Furniture does a lot of that. So the paints being used in a building, that's another vector for volatile organic compounds. The carpets in the building, if there's carpet, through wall finishes, again, because each of these elements is going to be using adhesives, right? And these adhesives are usually the biggest culprit for delivering VOCs into spaces. And so imagine, a carpeted floor in this space, for example, it's going to be full of VOCs if they're using a negative an adhesive that is a very poor, it's not a low emitting adhesive. And one way to counter it is to try to introduce nature into the spaces. So one strategy might be to introduce vegetation, so plants. And I know in the Caribbean, a lot of people, I mean, it's just par for the course that you're going to have a house plant or, your office plant. But in other parts of the world, it's not so common. And so if we can introduce more plants into the spaces, it will really help because the plants provide oxygen. First of all, they're biophilic. They provide a connection for us to nature as human beings. And they also provide some companionship sometimes. So in terms of natural ventilation, so if there's an opportunity to open a window, if you have a specific, if you have a passive strategy for ventilating the space, then that's an opportunity. In this situation here, where there's a lot of mechanical ventilation, it's not recommended because you'll throw off the humidity in the space. But apart from that, if there's an opportunity and it's allowed, and you don't sit in a space that's going to be next to a highway where there's a lot of pollutants, then you might want to introduce that as an option. And so this is another example of the type of space. It's a different execution of the same types of strategies, but it's all the same. These are the key strategies for making sure that we can maintain a high quality indoor air situation for the well-being of the occupants of the building. And so that's it for me. And thanks for your time. And I hope it was informative. Look forward to getting some questions during the Q&A session.
Thank you, Ryan, for your presentation. Was very informative indeed. Our next presenter is Miss Grace Williams. Grace A. Williams is a registered interior designer, a certified aging-in-place specialist, and a well-accredited professional. Grace is an experienced interior design professional with over 25 years in the industry and 16 years as the owner of Grace in Design. She specializes in creating healthier, safer, and more accessible environments through people-centered design. With a Bachelor of Design in Interior Design from the University of Florida and a Master of Science in Building, Construction, and Facilities Management and this is from the Georgia Institute of Technology, she integrates wellness-focused and age-in-place methodologies as a well-accredited professional and a certified aging-in-place specialist. Passionate about healthy interiors and dedicated to housing accessibility, Grace is actively involved in initiatives that promote safe and supportive living environments. She contributes her expertise through organizations like Women Build, Habitat for Humanity, North Central Georgia, and Rebuilding Together Atlanta. Through her work, she strives to enhance quality of life by sharing spaces that foster long-term well-being and independence. Grace will present on the topic Sustainable Interior Designs. Grace, over to you.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Following behind Ryan and Heather, they've said so many things that I'm going to talk about. Dr. Douglas, you have my slides or you want me to put it up?
Sorry, I'll get them up for you. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So I'm an interior designer. I'm also a certified aging in place specialist, and I am well AP, just like Ryan. And so I'm going to talk a lot about well, but specifically, I want to start a conversation about, thank you. Specifically, let's have a conversation about how much time we spend indoors. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, World Health Organization has said that we spend 90% of our day indoors. Now, I grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in Jamaica. And for me, I was always outside. We were always outside, and our parents had to call us inside. And traditionally, we interacted with the outdoors more. We're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with everything from Sahara dust to hurricanes to just unexpected climatic events. So yes, there are many reasons for us to shelter indoors. But when we're done with this conversation today, I want you all to think about the fact that we do spend a lot of time indoors and how exactly we can work towards being more interactive with nature. Next slide, thank you. So what is interior design? Most people see interior design and they think of it as just the aesthetic side of it. We see the finishes, we see the furnishings, we see the colors, we see the textures, we see the artwork. We're all excited about that. But interior design is so much more than that. Interior design has to take into account how we're going to function in a space. So functionality is the most important thing. But then the next thing is how safe is the space? How accessible is the space? And then we're dealing with efficiency. How efficient is your space going to be? Because you only have so many things you can do in a space. And then, of course, we want it to be comfortable and then encourage sustainability. Next slide, thanks. Ryan did a wonderful job introducing well. And you understand that well is centered around people. So let's talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So air, he's gone into a lot of detail explaining how important our air quality is. These 10 concepts, though they'd be used by a building and in designing of buildings, I want you to think about it as how do we interact with the air in our homes, the air in our office spaces. We need to prioritize a higher quality of air. That means, just like Ryan said, open a window. In the Caribbean, traditionally, Heather has shown us how we used to live. We used to have operable windows. We weren't all living in an air-conditioned space. We need to get back to a point where we're able to enjoy natural ventilation because it's better for our spaces. But like Ryan explained, it has to be that there's a balance between the two. Your space has to be set up for it, where we're designing with ventilation, with windows that actually open, and that's in office spaces just as well as homes. Water. We want to be able to access clean, filtered drinking water. Nourishment. It's the idea that we want access to healthy foods, but we have to realize that, one, an establishment can give us access, but we in our own homes, there's a time where people lived with a garden. They had a garden where they could get to it. They had everything they needed. Not all of us can do that, but we can do something. I'd love for us to get to the point where supermarkets weren't so worried about whether or not you're doing it on your own, and that they encourage us to actually have healthier foods closer to home. With working with Rebuilding Together Atlanta, something that I've seen that's been very, very fruitful in our poorest communities, they're able to do community gardens These community gardens allow people who typically don't have access to healthy food to be able to not feel so disconnected and have the ability to eat healthier. Light. We're in the Caribbean, we have sunlight everywhere, but are we letting it inside? Are we walking in the sunlight? Are we allowing it to affect our sleep patterns? Now we're in a place where our artificial lighting mimics daylight. We want that. We want to have a balance of both. So when you look at your spaces, either it's an office space, a commercial space, a home space, you want to look at having as much daylight as possible. We've seen studies time and time again at how important it is to our circadian rhythm, but also to our just overall health. We're already getting our vitamin D from it. And if we're not careful with 90% of our day indoors, we're not getting enough light. Movement. We're already dealing with a global push for us all to be more active, but there's so many things that we can do. It's standing while we work. They suggest things like sit-stand desks, anything to promote healthier activity, taking breaks and walking. The designs I'll show you in a little bit try to integrate movement into the spaces so that people have to move. People have to move to get from one space to another, have to interact with the exterior. We can go to the next slide, thanks. Thermal comfort. Earlier I was asking Dr. Douglas if he could hear my fan. I live in a conditioned airspace. I'm in Georgia, actually. It's cold outside right now, and I apologize. I have no idea why my lawnmower is running outside. The guy is doing the lawn. He did not know I had a presentation right now, so forgive me. But I have a fan because sometimes, although I'm in a thermally regulated space with air conditioning and heating, it doesn't meet my personal thermal temperature. And so when we look at thermal comfort in a space, it's very important to understand that sometimes we need additional interpersonal thermatic control, which means we may need a fan, we may need a space heater. We're all responding to all of the climates that we're dealing with. Sound, just like I'm dealing with right now, we all have a sensitivity to sound. Sound can be defined as a personal perception of a mechanical influence. It's the lawnmower, it's the HVAC system, and we all react to it differently. I'll mention it a little bit later, but as we get older, we become more sensitive to sound. And so we're more perceptive of it, we're more influenced by it, and it can affect everything about our mental health. Materials, Brian's already talked about this in detail, but we want to reduce our exposure to hazardous materials in the building, but it's not just in the building, it's the furnishings we bring in, and also the things we clean our homes with, because we're using the cleaners we've used forever, and some of these cleaners are not good for us. Mind. This ties in with movement. This ties in with air, access to sunlight. They're all intermingled, and it's getting us to a point where we realize that our mental is influenced by the building itself, and we have more control over that than we realize. Community. We want to encourage each other to be more interactive. This is one of the things we learned out of COVID. We felt like we were trapped at home. We weren't able to leave. We weren't able to see friends and family. We weren't able to socialize. And so community is so very important. One of the hardest hit demographics that dealt with a lack of community during COVID was the elderly. And in their communities, they realized that isolation was so terrible for the elderly that in designing now, they're making every effort to design communities where even if we're in a lockdown situation, if we're in a situation where we have to change our social interaction, there are ways in which people can still have access to family, still have access to friends, even if it's a controlled environment. And that's how we have to think as we move forward. Next slide, next slide. Okay. So I have 3 projects we're going to talk about, and I'm not going to say everything they did. This is the 3 Garden Road Central, Hong Kong, China. And they were able to not just achieve LEED, but WELL, BEAM, and WIRED score. So this is an existing building. It's a 47-story, 2-tower building. They were able to integrate wellness in so many different ways, where they said to the people who work in this building, we're going to give you so many options for, one, being able to use the fitness center. The fitness center they provided actually has a pool, which from what they've clarified online is unheard of in central Hong Kong. We're going to create a wellness atmosphere by doing having art integrated, but culturally bringing together a classical concert every month that's free, that people who work in the building can be able to access. It gives us things to do outside of work. The fact that the fitness area is there, they're encouraging a work-life balance where you're at work, but you're able to go and work out. You're able to get that exercise in. They also created lots of spaces for interaction outside of work. There are restaurants, there are co-working spaces, there are spaces where you could actually do events for the company, outside of the company, with other people, just a lot of interaction. They even went further. What I'm showing in this image is the fact that they've been able to use 25% of their exterior space and create this green area, which is also rare in the middle of the city. But they also created gardens where people can go and do gardening, because we need other things to do outside of just exercising, and creating those opportunities within this large commercial district is just awesome. We can move to the next slide. So this is Nava Lake House in Denver, Colorado. You can see from the image there that it has a view of the lake. And this building was very unique in that it was designed and started construction before COVID, but was finished after COVID. There was a lot of research that went into the design, but what they did, they were able to tap into residents before they moved in and residents after they moved in. So there's a lot of research out there about wellness of where they lived before and their wellness after moving here. There is so much thought put into this. It's the access to the exterior. It's not just the views, it's actually being able to go outside. And because the building was being designed during COVID, they had the benefit of seeing how this building changed the lives of people who were coming out of COVID, how socially they were able to interact with neighbors, come outside and eat with neighbors, do yoga and fitness, because it created a whole fitness program. The actual design allows for a lot of walking paths, so people are able to go outside, they're able to walk the trails. They have a large 70-foot lap pool that opens onto the lake. So it's generating so much interaction with the exterior that they're improving people's lives. One more thing that I didn't mention here is they created an urban garden. So they weren't just saying, hey, we're talking about you eating healthier. They actually gave them the ability to eat healthier. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the Caplo Manzano house. This is a house in Miami, Florida. And it's an interesting story. Caplo and Manzano are a husband and wife team. Caplo is an architect. And they're both divorcees. And they got married. And when they got married, they had to blend their families because they had 5 children bringing together. When they bought a house and moved in together, Caplo said from an article that they were having lots of health reactions to the house, allergies, and minor disruptions to their sinus. When he investigated, he found in one of the daughter's rooms that there was mold growing out of some of the outlets. In response to this, they designed a house where they were trying to not give the traditional house with drywall to allow mold or any insects or bugs to hide in. So a couple of features of the house, there's no drywall, and you can see from the picture below, the walls are built with the structure, but they're covered with panels. These panels are all removable. If they need to, they can access the plumbing. They can access the no duct conditioning of air system. They have solar panels, so they're providing their own energy. They've used non-toxic finishes, and you can see from the picture above, they have access to sunlight, 360 views, but they've also removed any finishes on the floor or the ceiling apart from the paneling. So anything that you would have been getting as a off-gassing from a carpet that was glued down or ductwork that would have had mold growing in there, they've removed all of those as influences from this house. They've gone a step further and they've elevated the floor of the house. So they actually park below, and this is not a house that they moved into, but a house that they've sold. There's parking below the house, and there's also a large area below the first level of the house that is now a sheltered social area where they have an outdoor kitchen. So the elevation of the house, I know I probably said it on here, but I'll say it, was a direct response to climate change and what we've seen Florida dealing with hurricanes that cause flooding and just unexpected water levels changing at a minute's notice. Next slide, thanks. Okay, as an aging in place specialist, I always talk about certain features that are so important to our aging environments. And I say aging environments because in the Caribbean, we realize that this is not something we actually talk about. We don't talk about what happens when we get older. Where are we going to live? So often we live in houses that are so much older than the technologies we understand and we know we need. Houses that no longer respond to our changing mobility needs, as well as just simply not meeting our ability to go inside and outside of our houses. So I wanted to just mention a few things on how aging in place and well interact. So we're talking about light and well-being. As far as light, we want to incorporate as much natural light into our areas that encourage sleep, regular sleep patterns, reduce glare, because as we get older and are changing eyesight, we become very sensitive to glare. And then provide ample task lighting because one of the biggest issues, as we all know, is to prevent falls. If there isn't enough lighting, people have a tendency to trip, to misstep. It's not on here, but of course, we want to clearly define steps and give enough railings for people to hold on to. We're talking about mental well-being, and we want to incorporate as much natural and familiar elements into a space, because as we get older, we want our spaces to have the things that make them ours. We want to encourage a sense of belonging, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we lose is that community. If people aren't able to go out as often as they used to when they were younger, if they're not driving anymore, if they're not as mobile, they don't feel as connected. Movement, yes, we definitely want to encourage movement, but we want to encourage safe mobility, clear paths. We all know as we get older, we accumulate a lot of things. We want to look at how we can make sure that we're not accumulating to the point where we can't easily navigate our homes. Grab bars are so important. Everybody I mention a grab bar to, the first thing they say is, we don't need that, we're not there yet. A grab bar isn't for after you've had a fall, but to prevent a fall. We have mishaps, falls most in kitchens and bathrooms. Those are the areas we want to focus on. We want slip-resistant flooring, and we want ergonomic furniture. There's so much furniture out there that's beautiful and gorgeous, and if you sit in it, it's so difficult to get up. Thermal comfort. Seniors are more sensitive to extreme temperatures, so we want to maintain stable indoor temperatures. Sound management, I mentioned before, so we want to reduce background noise. Yes, we want to use softer materials, which suggests that we're going to put down rugs, but if we're going to put rugs down, they have to be attached in place. The corners have to be looked at. We have to make sure we're not tripping over edges, because once again, that's one of the things we're trying to prevent falls. Soundproofing is also important to improve communication and comfort. Communication, because if you're in a space that has a lot of reverberation, it's sometimes more difficult for the elderly to understand what you're saying. Yes, as we get older, we're dealing with everything from changes in our eyesight, changes in our hearing, and changes in our mobility. Community, we definitely want to communicate spaces that foster interaction with family and caregivers, but with a larger community. Something we want to look at is, we're going to create parks, we're going to create more green spaces. Make sure these are spaces that are accessible for everybody. People with mobility challenges want to go to the parks. They want to go to and experience nature just like everybody else. But we also want to make sure that homes, and this is a big issue, that our homes allow for social interaction where the people who live there can leave. Yes, we have to look at ramps. There's so many places that people have to traverse in a wheelchair or with a walker that doesn't allow for them to get in and out of the spaces easily. We need to look at ramps, but we need to look at ways of getting people out of their homes to reduce isolation. I'll go to the last slide now, Dr. Douglas. Thank you. And although we've talked about all of these things, as our call to action and my conclusion before we go to Chris, I want you to look at ways we can purify our air. Ron already mentioned it. Vegetation, bring vegetation indoor. Open windows regularly. Replace air filters regularly. Something as simple as installing a water filtration system doesn't have to be huge. It can be the filtration jug. It can be filtration at a tap. But just being mindful of the water that we're drinking, because we know that as we go through climate change and we experience anything from flooding or A hurricane, it changes the water, clarity, it changes the type of water that's coming in, and we need to, from our own individual standpoint, take control of the air and water that is coming into our houses. Nourishment, stock up on healthy snacks. I already mentioned doing a vegetable garden, but reduce processed foods and find ways that we can get access to as much healthy nourishment as possible. Light, this I've probably said so many times now, you can say what I'm about to say. Yes, natural daylight, get outside, interact with the sun and enjoy nature. Movement, a standing desk, yes, but there are sit to stand converters, taking breaks from work. So many of us work all day, and we are a part of that 90% indoor population, but we need to find ways of interacting more outside. Going and walking in the park, going and walking with a friend. Yes, I've talked about safety with materials, but then we can look at using non-toxic cleaning products. This is such a simple way that we can start to reduce our impact on our environment, but also clean our environments in such a way that we're not exposing ourselves to hazardous chemicals. I think that's all I have. I'll hand off to Chris. Thank you, Dr. Douglas.
Thank you, Grace, for your presentation. Thank you very, very much. Before we go any further, I wish to remind you to complete the second poll. So those of you who haven't as yet, kindly complete the second poll. Now, our final presenter for this webinar is Mr. Christopher Galarza, Executive Chef and co-founder of EcoChef, located in the USA. Chef Christopher Galarza is a pioneering force in the culinary world, known for his unwavering commitment to sustainability and innovation in kitchen design. As the founder of Forward Dining Solutions, LLC, and co-founder of EcoChef, Chef Galarza has become a leading advocate for decarbonizing commercial kitchens and championing the green industrial revolution within the food service industry. His work is driven by a deep passion for environmental stewardship, and he is widely recognized for his efforts in educating and empowering chefs, culinary professionals, and designers to adopt sustainable practices. Chef Galarza will present on the topic Sustainable Kitchens and Green Hospitality Revolution. Chef, welcome to our webinar. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
You're
having me.
welcome.
We're just going to go straight into it. We have a lot to cover. So yeah, my name is Chef Chris Galarza. I'm a 20-year veteran of hospitality. I'm an international expert in commercial kitchen electrification, decarbonization, and sustainable hospitality, as we talked about. Founder of these companies and co-founder of EcoChef. I'm also the president of the American Culinary Federation's Pittsburgh chapter, as well as his 501c3, the Pittsburgh Culinary Initiative. I'm proud to say that our work has been featured in many outlets such as Time, CNN, Fast Company, Bloomberg, and there was even the documentary we were in for Nova called Chasing Carbon Zero. Most recently, I made headlines by becoming the first chef in history to become a certified executive chef using an all-electric kitchen, permanently debunking the myth that you can't produce quality food without gas. So in that vein, what is in an electric kitchen? What are we talking about here? Well, obviously, we're looking to move away from fire. And in doing so, we need to dispel a couple of misconceptions, right? So the first is that there is these coils that people think when they think about electric cooking, that those coils are slow, they are non-responsive, at least not as responsive as we need in a commercial kitchen. And then there are those glass tops that glow red that people mistaken for induction cooking. Those are essentially those old antiquated coils with a glass top. Again, slower, not as that doesn't perform as well as what we need. What induction is, it's a safer way of cooking using electromagnetic currents and using the molecular structure of the pan to heat the element, to heat uh, the food. It's an easy way of meeting your sustainability goals while also saving yourself money. Now, the way induction works is by creating an eddy current or an oscillating magnetic wave that excites the ferrous molecules in the pan in order to heat the metal up from the inside out. So the easiest way to think about that is your microwave at home. You turn it on, these little microwaves go into your food, gets the water molecules really happy. That happiness creates molecular friction. Voila, you have hot food. But there needs to be some pros and cons to this equipment, and in order for us to have an honest conversation, we're going to jump straight into that. So first is that induction is very high efficient. We're talking 90+% versus the 35 you get from gas. I have to caveat that the 35% efficiency from a gas range is coming from those figures come from a lab. It is what if things were in the ideal situation. Truth be told, in the hands of a chef, those situations are not ideal. And in fact, efficiency then plummets to around 10 or 20%, meaning for every dollar you're spending on gas, 10 or 20%, 10 or 20 cents of that is actually being used to do what you bought it for, which is to cook food. The rest is going into your space, making your kitchen hotter, making your air conditioning work more often, making your refrigeration work more often, which is ultimately raising your electricity costs. It also heats up really quickly. There's a precise temperature adjustments. We can set it to the degree that we want, so it can stay plus or minus within 1 degree. There's a reduction in idling equipment, reduction in combustion, which we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There's a dramatic improvement in thermal comfort, and we'll share some figures here shortly. But it's also, there's an extension of the life of your pots and pans, which is something that people don't really think about. Right? These are typically fixed costs that, hey, every couple of years, we're going to be replacing our pots and pans. We have to replace them because fire is a very violent way to heat metal. They will warp, they will crack. Pots and pans with induction, not the case. In fact, the pots and pans I bought 10 years ago are still being used right now. But there are some true cons to this, right? The initial cost. There is an increase in cost from going from a gas kitchen to an electric kitchen. We're seeing on average around 20%. And the payback period is around 18 months or so. Compatible cookware. People think, oh, we're going to have to buy specialized cookware. No, if you're used to buying aluminum, then yeah, you're going to have to buy new cookware, right? If you're buying all aluminum or all copper, those aren't going to work. But most cookware are compatible, especially cast iron. And also, do I have to upgrade my electricity? And you might have to upgrade your panel depending on the location, but that's something that an engineer will be able to tell you. So what sort of solutions exist? Truth be told, there's nothing in a gas kitchen that doesn't have an electric alternative. That includes induction range, tilt skillets, fryers, griddles, ovens, you name it. More importantly, this technology allows us to refine our traditions while also being good stewards to the planet. So examples here are the tandoor oven as well as the induction wok. Now, woks are an interesting one. We've heard a lot about this all over the world, really. People think that you can't cook good food without a gas wok, which isn't true. We have a couple of these in Microsoft, and they're cooking just fine. Matter of fact, that one there is a 12 kilowatt induction wok. The one at Microsoft is a 16 kilowatt. Pretty massive, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second. Continuing on the conversation with woks, most people don't know that that's 100,000 BTU burner, right? The burners in your home are around 10,000 BTU. So it's very, very powerful. And because of that, we just talked about how fire is a violent way of heating up metal. It has to cool itself down before the machine will start to, again, crack or warp. So because of that, there's a constant stream of water that is running through these woks, which is wasting about 250,000 gallons of water per year per wok. So if you're a restaurant with, say, 4 woks, before you turn on a dishwasher or even wash your hands, you're already in the red with 1 million gallons of water being used just to cook your food. And the efficiency isn't that great either. We're talking 19-20%. And because of that, you can only cook about 124 pounds of food per hour. So that sounds like a lot. But let's look at the induction version. That's a countertop version, portable, small, compact, 5 kilowatts at 91% efficient. You cook 117 pounds of food per hour, nearly the same amount. And that is what we would call powerful, but rather small but mighty. So what I mean when I talk about efficiency, and what that means is the energy coming into the equipment versus what actually reaches the food. So a 30,000 BTU gas burner, again, at the lab condition 35%, you're only at best getting 10,000 BTUs to your food. Conversely, a 5 kilowatt on the low end, 85% efficient, getting 14,000, which is why you're able to cook more. So going to 100,000 BTU gas wok, 20,000 BTUs are actually reaching your food, versus the example I showed you earlier. Again, on the low end of the efficiency, we're talking 35,000. And at Microsoft, we have a 16 kilowatt. So you can imagine how much more power they get. As a matter of fact, they're feeding about 10,000 people a day. And as far as I heard, they don't even go past half power. So another myth we hear is that, gas is just cheaper to purchase, right? So we're going to stick with that. So our friends at the Food Service Technology Center did an analysis. And at the time they took this analysis, these were the national averages. If you were to operate your kitchen for 360 days a year, for 15 hours a day on average, and you were spending $1 per therm, it would cost you a little over $1,120 to run your gas range. Same exact conditions, but 17 cents per kilowatt hour, it's going to cost you $1,114. Now, no, I would never advocate that we make these expensive changes for $9 a year, but it's just to highlight that it's not about how much your utility costs; it's about how you use it, right? These are investments into your spaces. Food is a thing that's going to make us our money, right? It's important that we invest our money wisely, and I can't imagine any business owner investing into something that and only using 20% of that, right? So which is why I advocate for this. Now, thermal comfort's a big topic. We all know kitchens are hot, but how do we define thermal comfort? And thermal comfort is broken down to essentially 3 pillars. The first is, we'll call it Mother Nature, right? What's the temperature outside, the air velocity, the humidity? What are the things that you as the operator can control, right? The air temperature you have set, the equipment that you purchase that's radiating heat, and what do you as the individual, what can you do, what can you control, which is your clothing and your activity. Now, ASHRAE did a study where they went to over 100 commercial kitchens in the United States, all different climate zones, and they compared it between summer and winter conditions. They found the optimal comfort range between 68 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And they found that the only time a kitchen was comfortable was when they were prepping or cleaning. When they were cooking, you can see they're far outside that range. And a couple of years ago, an article came out in the New York Times saying that kitchens in New York City were regularly hitting 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And I can only imagine what that is in Barbados, imagining even hotter. So what does it look like to be an electrified kitchen? Well, this is data from my actual kitchen. This is taken, and I'm going to tell you so you can look it up if you want, between September 9th and 16th of 2019 in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania. The outside temperature is anywhere between 85 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And my kitchen, cleaning, prepping, cooking, never exceeded 74 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a near 60-degree drop. That is a massive change. And now imagine what the costs are for tempering that air. Obviously, dramatically lower. Now, to talk about ventilation for a second, I think this is one of the most under-discussed topics in commercial kitchens. At Chatham, where we took these measurements, we had employed a demand control kitchen ventilation system with heat recovery and remote monitoring. The ventilation system had these sensors embedded, so it would scan the cooktops and let us know, when it needed to kind of go up and down. So we never had to worry about turning it off. It just kind of thought for itself. And the efficiencies were pretty crazy. This is a picture where, I don't know if you can see it, where we were operating at 94% efficient. We were only using 6% of the energy that we would normally be using. And what that means is that if you look at the red bar there, that is a traditional constant flow exhaust. That system would have cost us about $100,000 to put in for the space. And someone would come in the morning, turn it on, be at full blast all day. The green bar, that's our demand control ventilation. Now, we were projected to pay off this piece of equipment, which cost us $300,000. So remember that 20% delta? This one piece of equipment was 300% greater. We were supposed to pay it off in 14 months. We paid it off in 9, meaning that the university itself was saving about $100,000 a quarter, just in energy efficiency alone. These are real savings. These are real tangible benefits to businesses. Also to the individual, the air quality is a big deal. So what's in these quote unquote natural gas? Well, when you combust it, you're releasing things like carbon dioxide, formaldehyde, NOx, sulfur dioxide, benzene, which there are no safe levels of, particulates like soot and smoke. But we're going to focus a little bit on carbon monoxide because that's something we all have in our homes, in our work, sensors to kind of let us know that this is, if it's around us. Now, for those of you who don't know, carbon monoxide is an odorless and colorless toxin, where typical outdoor concentrations are anywhere from 0.03 to 2.5 parts per million. U.S. federal standards dictate that you cannot exceed 9 parts per million without some regulatory action. But it's unfortunate that there's no indoor air quality standards in America because indoor spaces can regularly exceed 200 parts per million when you're cooking. Symptoms of which are nausea, vomiting, headache, lightheadedness, and it's very, very dangerous for us. And chefs are in a position where we are surrounded by the highest emitting pieces of equipment. Now you can say, well, you have a big ventilation system above you, should be fine. It has to pass through us before it goes up to the ventilation. So what are we doing to ourselves? Now, we can't talk about all the benefits, so I'm just going to summarize it here. Electrifying your kitchen means the reduction of idling equipment, which is saving you money, reducing your building's emissions, which is reducing your environmental impact. It's benefiting your operational efficiency, which is, again, saving you money. There's precision cooking controls, dramatic improvement of thermal comfort, extension of your life, of the life of your pots and pans. It's easier to clean, which is going to save you on chemical costs. Faster throughput means an increase in productivity, and then your dollar per labor hour is improved. It's also improving your indoor air quality. Now, let's dive into the economics of the hospitality industry in the Caribbean. Now, Barbados is an interesting place where in 2022, the hospitality and tourism industry produced 21% of the country's GDP, around $2.3 billion. It employed just under 13% of the workforce. And it's projected, rather in the first 9 months of 2023, it had already increased by over 4%, right? If we take a step back and look at the Caribbean, in 2019, before the pandemic, it was 14% of the GDP. Now there's an ever greater reliance on it, where 33% of the GDP of the Caribbean comes from hospitality and tourism. You take an even bigger step back and you include Latin America, it's nearly $1 trillion just from one industry. And it's already projected to grow nearly 4% for 2024. And now in the US, the National Restaurant Association says that the average profit margin is around 4%. I couldn't find reliable numbers for the Caribbean, but you can see how that's a razor thin margin. We're providing so much economic benefit, but we're barely scraping by. And that's because of how much waste is in our current system. Water consumption, energy consumption, chemical consumption. It's quite a lot just to maintain, but there's a better way of operating. So the question is, where do we go from here? And that's where I'm excited to talk about EcoChef, right? EcoChef is a kitchen certification company that is standardizing how we design, build, and operate commercial kitchens. Commercial kitchens have long been this black spot, this, thing that people don't know how to handle or talk about, so they just don't, right? And there's a lot of certification companies that do an incredible job with the building, but they just don't know how to tackle the kitchen, right? We heard a lot about LEED and WELL. There's also Passive House and ILFI, even EarthCheck, right? These are companies that do really well with helping you understand how your building can perform, but they don't do a lot with the kitchen. They don't do a lot with helping you choose equipment, with helping you create a healthier space for your chefs, to helping you increase production, decrease operational costs, which maximizes profits. So what we've done is we've created a certification company that tries to tackle all of that, right? We will certify your kitchen through our 4 pillars: energy efficiency, health and comfort, waste, performance. We also offer equipment certifications. We also have professional accreditations, and we've partnered with industry leaders like Energy Star, the American Culinary Federation, utilities and local governments in the United States across the country. We're in conversations with folks in Hong Kong, Australia, Spain, the Caribbean, Canada, all over the world. And we're also in conversations with these certification companies that you've heard about already, which we can't talk about just yet. The professional accreditations is an interesting thing because we're trying to give the tools to professionals to be successful. And we've done that by creating 3 levels of certification. The first is EcoChef Associate, which is designed for those who are coming into the workforce, whether you be an architect, an engineer, sustainability, hospitality. There's even a whole section on policy. So if you're going into local government, to understand how the hospitality industry works, so you can understand how you can have a greater positive impact. Culinarian is just that, focused primarily on hospitality. It's a crash course in sustainable hospitality. How do you maximize the potential for this equipment? How do you train your staff? How do you make sure that you're operating in a more responsible manner? And finally, practitioner, which is for those who are designing kitchens, those who are already in the industry. These 3 accreditations are going to be live very, very soon. And I'm proud to say that as we talk more about this, and as we begin to expand our footprint across the globe, we're incredibly excited to announce that we'll be partnering with the University of West Indies in Cave Hill campus to offer these courses for professionals from all walks of life all around the world. And with that, if you want any more information, the Green Industrial Revolution, Understanding the Green Industrial Revolution is a book that I wrote that is to accompany the courses that we created for those accreditations. And if you follow the QR code, it'll take you to the EcoChef website, ecochef.org, which would give you more information about the programs. And there's also a link there for the book as well. But with that being said, thank you so very much for allowing me to go over time a little bit. Contact info is there, and I'm very, very much looking forward to the robust conversation that is to follow. Lot to cover.
Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Very insightful indeed. Special thank you to all our presenters, Heather, Ryan, Grace, and Chris, and PVC Maynard for being here. At this time, we want to jump right into our question and answer session. Dr. Douglas will be the moderator for this segment, so you're free to ask the panelists your questions and have them answered. Dr. Douglas.
I thank you very much, Asantia. And as you would have seen and witnessed, this was an all-star lineup and very excellent presentations. And I know that many of you want to know more. I want to know more. So I know most of you want to know more as well. But have no fear, we are preparing more in store on these exciting topics. We are also having a course with Chef Galarza that will be live very shortly. where we are going to have practitioners within the hospitality industry, whether you're a chef or within hotel or restaurants. We're going to be offering short courses. I think it's a four-week course where you can do very intense training. We also have a longer course, about 13 weeks, where that is concerned. But we're also thinking of offering, and that's why we wanted you to fill out the Zoom poll, of offering either a 1-day workshop, 2-day workshop, or short course, where persons can come and have a variety of training on all of these integrated topics. If you want a specialized one, we can customize that also as well. But we just want to signal to you that we are responsive to the needs that are evolving with the exposure to climate change to all of our existing sectors. But predominantly, we want to look at the housing, construction, we want to look at hospitality and tourism. And Chef Galarza has shared those very interesting stats about Barbados and the economy and the role that tourism plays. And now within the scope of biosecurity, we have a rule of having first 3 main factors that really drive the risk in biosecurity. The first is infrastructure, and you would have seen a lot of the focus within these presentations focusing on infrastructure, whether this is in kitchens, whether this is your home aging in place, or just the actual building of itself. Then there is the environment with climate change. But then the third, and probably the most difficult risk factor to manage is humans. And that is something that we are very cognizant of. That's why the center is in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And most people who hear that go, oh, wow, why is that? And we love that question because that gives us the opportunity to get into the nitty-gritty of the human behavioral and the context of social science and why that is so very important. Now, we do have some questions that were in the Q&A. 2 of them have been answered already. Thank you, Mali Kwamina. I think Heather has, Ms. Pinnock has answered your questions there. We have one outstanding one, which I will go to rather quickly. And I'm not sure if this would be, more than likely, I think this would be for Ryan, Mr. Clark. Would you recommend always having windows that can open to provide fresh air? And I think this centers around sustainable design of homes or buildings. And this is from Suzanne Harris. So Ryan, you want to take that question?
Sure. So as Grace mentioned, in a residential context, it's going to be a little different. And I think Heather also touched on it a little bit. If the building is designed as was in the past, like the Chow House designs in Barbados, and I'm sure Jamaica and all the other islands have similar architectural expressions of basically sustainably designed buildings. If the building is designed for natural ventilation, then you can keep the window open. But I think in a commercial building, it's a little bit different. Why? Because you have paper, you have electronic equipment, et cetera, et cetera. In the Caribbean, there's a lot of humidity. And so when you open that window, you invite humidity into the space. And while you might get a fresh breeze, you also get, maybe some salt spraying, maybe some mosquitoes or other vectors in there as well. So you got to be aware of that. But in general, if you're going to open a window, you shouldn't keep the air conditioning on, because like I said before, the split inverter conditioner, the split system is just conditioning the air, and you're basically wasting electricity by leaving the window open. If the question is around getting fresh air in the context of having a split system, then you're in a difficult situation. You're gonna have to either have periods of time where you open the window, but you should turn the AC off, or maybe you crack a window like we did in New York when it's cold. But in a warm climate, it's not a good idea in terms of energy efficiency, like I said, and humidity, because humidity is also part of the thermal comfort, right? How we feel in a space, like Chris pointed it out, and also Grace touched on it. The air movement, humidity, elements that are giving off heat or absorbing heat, etc. They all contribute to thermal comfort. So I would say that I wouldn't recommend opening windows in the Caribbean in particular. But if it's in the US, again, you'd have to, look at the climate at that particular time, and in order to give a real good answer. I know that when I lived in New York, and in the winter we had, the steam, the radiators, they were blasting. I mean, I could wear a t-shirt in my apartment. It was that hot, sorry. And so we would always crack the window open a little bit to get some humidity, because the air was dry, really dry. And so in that situation, yeah, I can open the window, because the heat is ridiculous anyway. And I'm not opening it up. I'm saying like 1 inch, maybe, to allow for fresh air, to allow for some humidity, etc. So I hope that answers your question, Susan.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and we know the type of impact that the quality of the outdoor air has on the indoor air quality as well, because you're pulling air from the outside and bringing it inside. You're treating it in terms of conditioning it, reducing the humidity, and also reducing the temperature. We have several exposures or generators of air pollution within our environments within the Caribbean. We have Sahara dust, which is a major pollutant. It's transboundary. It's not generated within the region, but it's generated in Africa, or in the Sahel region in North Africa, and then it comes through our region at various times of the year, and it impacts on air quality. Obviously, impacts on health as well. So obviously that would also influence indoor air quality. We have, for instance, I think Heather had mentioned the wildfires, or the bushfires as we call them, in the Caribbean, that also result in a really sharp and acute deterioration of air quality over a very short space of time. We've been embarking here at the center with outdoor air pollution. There's a study that we have ongoing here in Barbados in partnership with Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania in the US. And we want to see if we can extend that study from looking not only at the outdoor, but also within the indoor, for instance, and stuff that Chris may be doing, maybe even in aging in places, elderly homes, or even within healthcare systems as well. Because the idea is that how can we build better? How can we improve the wellness and the health of everyone within our communities, within the context of climate change? How can we develop sustainably? I don't believe, and I don't think we believe, that is beyond our reach. I just think that we need to know the necessary steps in terms of how do we get there. Which brings me to my question for the panel. What if you were selected by, let's say, the highest political office in the Caribbean, which is really CARICOM? You are a panel of experts that have been selected, shortlisted to provide policy guidance on where the Caribbean sits at this moment and where they should go as it relates to the various niche areas that you provide. And we can start first with Heather, then we can go down the line to you, Ryan, then to Grace, and then finally to Chris. What would be some of the strategic policy interventions or recommendations that you would have for governments at the CARICOM level? I know it's a big ask.
I'm so glad you asked. This is something I feel strongly about. So you've opened the door.
Right.
So CARICOM the idea. Well, in my presentation, I started by saying I believe we'll do better together. CARICOM unity is such an important part of us being able to move together. A number of the islands are very small populations, fairly small economies, and so we have a bigger impact if we do things together. That's, of course, the benefit of CARICOM. I am a strong supporter of CARICOM. One of my concerns, though, is that CARICOM has identified a number of key areas in which they work. I understand why. We're looking at economic drivers. So you have CARICOM's consideration around tourism. CARICOM has spent a lot of time looking at energy and renewable energy recently, has opened entities around that. But what I do think CARICOM is lacking is a clear planning guideline. So many of us come from similar historic backgrounds in that we come from British colonial past, which include British colonial urban planning and space planning in general. And I do think that we need a regional standard guidance, direction around how sustainability is translated into the physical realm. So we do have quite a bit of work going on around standards. So kudos to CARICOM for that. We have been looking at standards. We have been looking at things like that. But in terms of physical planning, I think it's so important. When we see dislocation, when we see the issues and the impacts of extreme weather events, when we see even also the impacts of things like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, you see the need, one, for rapid response. So people always call for planning support right after an event, but it's not treated as a long-term core part of CARICOM's mandate. And I really think it should be. And yes, if I was called upon, I'd be happy to lead that entity. Thank you, Kirk.
You're most welcome. And now over to you, Ryan.
Wow, I haven't been, I haven't been that exposed to life in the Caribbean for like the past 30 plus years. I am a Bajan, but I haven't been there. I haven't lived in Barbados for a long time and haven't been connected to the Caribbean context of it. But I can tell you this. The reason I went to school for architecture is because of a hurricane that destroyed like 95% of houses on, I think it was U.S. Virgin Islands, one of the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. John, I think it was, in 1992. Andrew, I think it was. And, it really made me think about why is it that in this day and age, we're still having address the same problem of, poor housing stock. And so I thought to address it through architecture. And I think my point is that, like, after going through all this process and education and being exposed to things around the world, I saw that it can be done. And I think like the essence of it was already there through the designs that Heather showed, the Chattel House design, etc. All these strategies, they're already there. I think one thing the CARICOM can do is to encourage or maybe codify utilizing and applying these strategies along with newer technologies. So, for example, using special brackets or metal elements along with wood, because I think wood in the Caribbean, it's a resource that we should be using more often for several reasons. I think it can survive hurricanes, and it has survived hurricanes for years. And I think it can survive the next generation of hurricanes because we have this access to construction technology that can actually survive hurricanes. But we need to plan it properly. And not everybody should be able to just throw up a house anywhere. I know that there is there's need, right? And people are going to, do what they need to do. But when you have situations where houses are within throwing distance of a towel from one another, it invites disaster. And so planning needs to be more aggressive. Governments, we can figure out how to get there, but it needs to be more aggressive planning around it, because these things will happen again. these wildfires, they are coming. And these hurricanes, they're coming. And they're going to come again and again. They're going to be harder, stronger, more aggressive. And so if we plan, for these events, I think we can mitigate the damage.
What are some of the strategies that, for instance, within your niche area of work that you see daily on the projects that you've worked on, and in comparison to the building standards that we have within Barbados, for instance, or even within the Caribbean, that would be translatable, for instance, with the WELL or maybe the LEED certification? Because I know that there's a CARICOM entity, CrossQ, which I believe was working towards the standardization of building standards across the region. What would be some of the key things that you would like to see in a CARICOM, set of standards as it relates to the building quality? Because I know a lot of emphasis is placed on resilience to hurricanes, to wind shear, to damage, but we could just all build a concrete slab, right? Concrete roof, concrete walls. It has no aesthetic value, but the wellness of the person and the wellness of the family, when you're thinking of mental health, what are some of those key things you think would be useful in that type of recommendation?
So let me break this down a little bit, because I think there's several things you're touching on all at once. One thing I would deploy immediately, and it's something that most people can do or have access to, is more renewable energy. We live in the Caribbean. We got sun, like you live in the Caribbean, it's 300 plus days a year of sun. There's systems and equipment you can deploy, whether it's wind related or tidally related or PV. We use thermal solar for hot water. This is like the low-hanging fruit. We can do that, mandated immediately. Like in Israel, for example, in Tel Aviv in particular, you have to do a study of your, every building that's going to be over 4 stories has to be studied to evaluate the potential to make renewable energy. And after that study, you take, for example, the south facade of the building, and you take 90% of the roof, and whatever PV energy you can generate from that space, you have to make 60% of it. And you could choose however you want to do that, but you have to make 60% of it.
Interesting.
And that kind of mandate is driving change. And it's, first of all, it's driving the industry to first of all, reduce the energy consumption of the buildings, because you have to make 60% of the energy, right? Same thing's happening in Germany. Berlin, it's even more aggressive. The point is, we should be taking advantage of the things that are coming naturally to us. And yeah, these are low-hanging fruit. Now, you asked about other I guess design or code related issues that I see over here or elsewhere that could be applied. I think, this idea that we can just build concrete and everything will be, all problems will be solved. I don't think that's first of all economically viable. Also, it's not incredibly green. I mean, maybe we can come up with some mud, rammed earth strategies or whatnot, but again, it doesn't really fit the Caribbean. It fits other places. And so I think to be economically responsible, I was always a fan of Guyana and being a part of the CARICOM. There's an opportunity there because they grow sustainable forests that are ecologically and climate-wise, they fit the other islands, meaning they resist the termites, etc. They're very strong, resilient. They don't, they resist mold and all kinds of other vectors, etc. And we should be training our construction workers to be able to use those raw materials more effectively. What do I mean by that? I studied in Germany, in Munich in particular, and growing up in Caribbean, I always thought wood was not a very good building material. Is like psychologically and like socially, it was a poor material. When I get to Europe, like they love it. I mean, the most incredible houses are made of wood, and they're proud of it. And I think it's a social experiment. Maybe we need to change the psychology of the people. But wood can be beautiful. Wood can be beautiful, and it is beautiful. And I saw the craftsmen there really. You have to go to school to be a carpenter, and you need to spend a couple of years as a journeyman, they call it, basically an intern with a master craftsman. And it's a really good living, and you do really good work. And I mean, the beauty is amazing. So I would like to see that type of, energy being directed towards the Caribbean, because we have a history and we have a legacy of sustainable and resilient architecture, but it's not really, being celebrated.
Yeah, what I'm hearing coming through from what you're saying is the technical and vocational parts of our education being mainstream with our sustainable development thrust. I think that's very important to integrate.
Hand in glove.
Yeah, definitely hand in glove to work together to see how we can build stronger communities, stronger buildings, yes, but stronger communities as well. Because
And like you said, like you said, it's economic opportunity, because if these craftsmen really get good at their craft, I mean, sky's the limit. You can travel to other parts of the world, other parts of the Caribbean, and build out your practice. I have a friend in Guyana right now who's actually been, showing me wood, and I'm like I'm getting really excited because it's such an opportunity there, to utilize all the types of wood that they have. And it's not like they're being sustainably forested, so it's not like we're demolishing and like doing what's happening in the Amazon in Brazil. So it's being responsible.
It's I think a very viable strategy, similar to how we have the 20 by 25, 25 by 25 rather, sorry, with the push for food security within the CARICOM region. I think we should use that same type of strategy and approach to other sectors. And I don't think that it's beyond us, as I keep saying. I think it's something ripe for the picking. Now I think is the time to launch into these endeavors and to change the psyche of persons in terms of their preference for aesthetics. We've been kind of fed a certain aesthetic feel and look, and that is what we associate with affluence and with social progression. But perhaps we need to be re-educated in terms of what those preferences ought to be, as we become more knowledgeable of the harm that comes from those particular type of aesthetics to our health in particular.
I would say one last thing, and I'll let the others go, but it takes one. It just takes one. And I think if you were to look at I can share with you a bunch of my favorites, but anywhere in the region of like southern Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, they're masters. Masters.
Well, interesting. Well, that's good, because we will, as I discussed with you before, be seeking to see how we can develop these type of training courses to expose persons within the Caribbean to the opportunities, to the different alternatives as it relates to sustainable development practices, particularly within architecture and building design. I think this is going to be very important. So look out for Mr. Ryan Clark here at the Center for Biosecurity Studies in relation to courses and training coming in that vein. And now we open to Miss Grace Williams. Aging in place. This is something very, very topical within Caribbean, as we have an aging population. We see the need for mental health awareness, and also how can we combat the negative impacts of diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia, and the need for community as people age, the isolation that occurs. We have the unfortunate cases where persons are taken to the hospital, the elderly, and then they are abandoned, really atrocious. How can we, one, deal with that aging in place, but also recommendations for our healthcare sector? How can we build our polyclinics, for instance, our hospitals, our emergency room care? I had the opportunity when I was studying in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, to work at Sick Kids Hospital. That transformed my thinking and expectation of hospitals. I was never in a hospital where I felt like I was actually in a shopping mall. And that disarmed me from the ick factor, the fear factor. And I think it had a psychological impact on the sick children that were there. And it just shows you that how building design can be so powerful. So over to you, Ms. Williams. What would be your recommendation?
Excited. You just got me all excited. I have to line them all up because you said so many things a while ago. Okay, let me see if I can take them one at a time. So I'm going to start from people who can't afford it. Everybody wants to stay in their home.
True.
For people who can't stay in their home because they can't afford to stay in their home, they don't have somewhere to go. So many people have no other family members. So it's Dr. Douglas, it's a whole framework. It's a whole framework we have to start to make up. I don't know what your setup is like in Barbados, but in Jamaica, we have 14 parishes, and per parish, we have what used to be referred to as a nursing home. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to go there. And it's not any different here in Georgia. It's the nursing home. I don't want to go into a nursing home because it's where I'm left, where I'm dropped off, and nobody ever thinks about me again. So let me give you what my thinking is. From a policy perspective, we need to stop any conversation that acts like getting old is a disease, and that when you get old, you need to be farmed off to somewhere, okay? So then we need to start actually building places that are not thought of as hospitals or mental places. Just that whole stigma. Yes. So it needs to be somewhere nice that I can go because I don't have any children and nobody's taking care of me and I'm all alone and I can't live wherever I used to live, whether it's a little house or a big house or whatever, somewhere that I can go, be around people like me, interact with people like me, have community, thrive. We keep talking about this thing is I don't want to survive, I want to thrive. And then for housing that already exists, let's look at what's working and what isn't working. What isn't working is we're not responding to climate change. How about that? We're building houses that I can't open the windows, that I can't interact with the outdoor, that doesn't have a little garden that I can go sit in and do a little bit of gardening. Because for some people, it's just a little thing. It's a little thing that keeps me active and keeps me feeling that I am a part of my community and I'm interacting with my community. And then it's Rand mentioned it. How are we regulating what is being built? How are we managing that there is a standard, that there are some standards. Yes, we all know that we should be building showers that are easily accessible and having grab bars all over the place and having railings on stairs and putting in ramps. And that's just me just saying stuff off the top. But I say that all the time. Where is the policy that is making us move in that direction? And I don't even know if I captured half of what I want to say, but I want you to have time to talk to Chris. So that's my input for now.
We'll have some time for Chris, but I wanted to see if you could touch on the design of healthcare facilities, because I think that is an area that is ripe for change. The same thing being done. And I think it's not only for the patient, because oftentimes people think that the healthcare institution is only about the patient. We have to think about the healthcare worker who is there for several hours, working under lots of duress, and how can we make those spaces more amicable, more prone for persons to thrive, rather than having the negative connotations that may predominate in the current type of building designs.
So we need to have lots of conversations about this too. Okay? So it's everything from I am not going to be a building that makes you feel sick. But it's the thinking, and coming out of COVID, there's so much change. There's so much change. That's why I said we need to talk about it, because I need to show you some of the situations where we're not thinking of designing for the people who are coming here. We're thinking of designing for everybody. It's a community building. People work here. They don't need to walk in here and feel like, oh my Lord, I just came to work again. It needs to be a place they want to come to. They want to show up to. And there was one part that I left off that I didn't, and I know I'm not going into healthcare as much as you want, but there's another part that we're missing. There's a community outreach part. And I'm seeing that hospitals are identifying it, and where I am, fire departments, because we have so many elderly who are at their homes. Nobody's checking on them. Nobody knows how they're doing. Nobody knows if they're healthy. They need to be on somebody's radar somewhere. So somebody's on their quick dial list, that if they need something, they know they can reach out.
Well, I can speak to the context of Barbados, because I've been exposed to the Department of Emergency Management, DEM. They have department DEOs, so they have decentralized groups or offices within each parish that they have to account, and they have to know their communities. They have to know who the vulnerable are. So that framework exists, but I like the idea of how can we now leverage that type of framework and to now activate activities and programs that actually, really bring it to life. And I think that's the intention of an institution like the Department of Emergency Management. But to get persons to understand that this is part of health and wellness as well, and not just something that the emergency management does it only in the event we have an emergency. We think it is top of mind all of the time, and not just some of the time. I think that's
definitely.
Okay, we'll go to Chris. As you can see, we have lots to discuss, and we have not even scratched the surface on what we really can deliver in terms of training. So please feel free to reach out to us. Let us know what you would be interested in, and we will prepare you a meal and feast that you will be delighted to. And on that feasting note, I turn over to the master chef, the eco chef.
Yeah, definitely not master chef, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about your question, like how do you work with local governments? And we are doing a lot of that already, right? We're working with several governments around the U.S. Here in Pennsylvania, where I'm based out of, we actually partnered with the Department of Environmental Protection for the state. And what we found was really effective was education, right? Obviously, as a educator yourself, you understand the power of this. But there is a lot of stigma, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of mental barriers that we put up when we talk about changing the equipment or the fuel source, rather, of how we cook. So what we did was we took a unique approach, and I would love to see something like this in Barbados as well, or the broader community there. Creating incentive programs that is behind the paywall of free education. And what do I mean by that? I mean that before you can access funds to help you with transitions, it's important to understand what it is you're going to be spending these funds on. What is the technology? How does it work? How does it benefit your operation? Tapping into the robust network you have with your tourism board, right? Working with those leaders, getting them on board, using the economic power of the country to negotiate better rates on equipment for the citizens there or for the business community there, right? Creating a structure to support entrepreneurship, because the more those businesses thrive, the more the community thrives, right? Because that money's staying there. And then work to set standards, right? Work to set standards and set a standard of excellence of not just dining, but also sustainability, right? Because sustainability is responsibility. And the more responsible you are with how you source ingredients, how you source equipment, how you operate your businesses, not just from a financial standpoint, but from a people standpoint, you're going to see that although your hospitality community is thriving, an even greater thrive, because it's not just business owners thriving, it'll be people thriving, there's staff that's thriving. There's a lot that can be said there. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now. But there's so much that we could do. I just want to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out or any other questions out. But I'd love to work with the government on a way to create those incentive programs, fund those incentive programs, educate those who are going through the programs, and creating a safer, healthier, equitable hospitality industry.
And I think that's very, very important. As tourism, as we have coined phrase within our tourism is our business, and let's play our part. So I believe that sustainable development has been on the agenda of CARICOM for several years, several decades. That has now been changing in terms of the face of sustainable development. What we're seeing, renewable energy efficiency. We're seeing now with building design, other sustainable designs are now coming to the fore, which makes what we're discussing highly relevant and timely. And so we want to be able to capture this lightning in a bottle, as we would call it, and really use it to catalyze change, good change, necessary change within Barbados, within the rest of the Caribbean and CARICOM, because that's how we will develop sustainably. So I know that there were some some comments within the chat, and I thank you for placing them there. I don't think there were any. Oh, there was one other, and I'll take this last question from Mr. Antonio Joyat. The current CRCP 1023 is a regional code of, I want to see if that's proactive but it's a code for construction of homes. It is available to all. Why not use that instead of developing another instrument? Yes. So we were just discussing policy in terms of home building, in terms of the standards for building. And we were just looking to see where we thought the gaps are and how we can close those gaps. So maybe that's something that we can probably, Dr. Joy, if you could perhaps share that document, maybe we can engage with the panelists, not in this particular webinar, but maybe that's something that we could all take a look at and see what is being proposed or what is already there regionally, and see maybe where we think there could be improvements in the current or existing standards, and go from there. But thank you for flagging that for us as well. Now, I know we've been here for 2.5, going almost 3 hours. So we want to allow you to get back to your work. We know there's a recording, and we'll try to endeavor to have this up as soon as possible. And if you want to get in contact with any of the panelists, and you don't have their contact information, if you reach out to us, we will be sure to share that contact information with you. Like I said, we will be looking to develop training courses, EcoChef, that's on the way. And I'll give you a sneak preview of what that will look like in just one short second. If I can look at this. And there you can see Master Chef. This is what we have planning in the works. The date is yet to be determined, but stay tuned for this. And like I mentioned, these are the certifications through the University of West Indies KFO campus, Center for Biosecurity Studies, EcoChef, but also the American Culinary Federation and Education Foundation, and the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the US. And it's the power shift, transforming commercial kitchens into sustainable leaders. Strategies to tackle indoor air pollution, energy waste, and food waste. So stay tuned, and there's lots more to come, as you can tell by the richness of the conversations that we've had, and also to the very enlightening content from the presentations. We thank you all for staying with us for the entire journey of this particular webinar. Like I said, there's more to come, so don't think that this is the end. We have lots more in store for you. So on behalf of the Center for Biosecurity Studies, on behalf of Ms. Heather Pinnock, Mr. Ryan Clark, Ms. Grace Williams, and Chef Christopher Gallard, so thank you all so much for joining us, and take care and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.